you. This is the Policies and Practices Subcommittee of the Commission on Racial Equity for Salt Lake City. This meeting is being held remotely and being recorded and will be posted on the city website. Thank you, Shaf and Simran.
Thank you, Josh. Quick summary, Commissioner Kum. I heard privacy considerations should be added to discussions on body-worn camera, and point 3 on the document we were discussing, and the last one is use of force should warrant some discussion as well. Mr. Roberts, did I miss something from that?
Yeah, I think that's what I captured as well.
Okay.
I see Carol has her hand up. Yes.
I'm not sure if this falls into any of the categories, but I'm wondering if the mental health issue for the African American community falls in, or just people of color, falls into any of these categories.
So there's a yeah, I mean, I see that there's a conversation with number 1, you know, the collaboration between, because it kind of focuses on mental health, but, and also number 2. So if you think we should add a sub point, you know, we can. I'm not something. So I think what I'm hearing you say is you're not seeing a specific highlight for mental health as it relates to people of color.
Right, and you're right. Maybe the mental health will address that component. So, you know, we can play with it and see how that works.
Okay, I'm just writing that down too.
Thank you.
I do think it's important to affirmatively include that in our recommendations, the disproportionality of access to mental health services that BIPOC communities experience. So there's a level of treatment that's missing, and that can, maybe we can extrapolate that it's going to be more likely that would end in a crisis, which means that currently the police would come to their door, right? So that really is a huge impetus to be able to provide more services at a lower level and a more balance of services, so that if it does get to that crisis point, we have better chances for outcomes with more highly trained folks and with more tools in their toolbox than what law enforcement typically brings to the table.
I thank you for saying that, because that was going to be on the list. We now have, you know, the Black clinicians of Utah, but we don't have a lot of people of color in therapy, especially African Americans doing therapy. So that's very important. So thank you for putting it that way.
I'm hearing 2 sub issues. Please forgive me if I'm wrong here, Miss Carol and Steve. One is access to mental health, and one is communication of the resources on mental health. And I think they go hand in hand. But am I right here if you say access to mental health to minority communities, especially Black community? Is that?
Culturally, for me, culturally sensitive.
Culturally sensitive.
Culturally sensitive.
Thank you for that clarification.
Can I just suggest that we take advantage of Chief Doubt's time while he's here and get some feedback or some input from him. Thank you for being here, Chief Doubt. We'd love to hear or let you weigh in for a second. I know your time is valuable.
And you have that snappy new haircut, so we want to put you on display for this.
I wasn't going to say anything about that, but thank you.
That's why he voted to record the meeting. He wanted to document that.
Well, thanks. I'm here with you as long as you need me today. So I agree with all 3 of these buckets. I think they're a good place to put resources towards and study these issues. One thing I did notice when I looked up the resource under the bucket number 2, it's the last bullet point. It says create a mental health division within the police department. I looked up Houston's website that's linked here, and so we have every one of those things. We just call them different things. And so instead of maybe creating mental health, maybe I'm just suggesting that to expand or put more resources towards it, because it's not a very big unit in the department, but it could be. is what I'm trying to say. So instead of creating it, we already have it, just called different things. But other than that, these all three look good. And then I do appreciate Commissioner Andrew Reardon and Commissioner Schiffler bringing up that we need to have something about racial equity in this whole discussion.
Thank you, Chief Dowd. Okay, so I just want to kind of back up for a second and just make sure that we did get are we getting agreement on all the buckets, because we're going deeper into which is a good thing. But I just want to make sure I'm hearing agreement so far. How about this? If there's any resistance to the buckets, maybe if you'd like to come off of mute or raise your hand and just want to share your thoughts, because I want to make sure that we're building consensus as we're moving forward.
Or you can add in the chat. If you
Or add in the chat, because I don't, yes.
Please write a chat to us, and either privately or either way, we'll love to give everyone a chance.
Yes. And we'll wait. If we see anything or hear anything, we'll address it. And then the next piece I want to kind of get, and again, if I also want to be fluid and flexible, the next piece is, are we missing any buckets? Okay, because I have heard so far from Commissioner Coombe, maybe there should be a fourth bucket, which is focused on use of force policies. So I recognize that. Are we missing any other categories that maybe should be included that we can think of at this moment? Not that this is, if that comes up later for you, that's okay too. I'm just saying at this point, is there anything that we can think of that that warrants its own category?
I was going to say the same thing. If we can come back to it later, so that we can get started at least on this.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Yeah.
A thought that I've had participating in these meetings the last few months, and particularly the areas where commissioners have expressed frustration with terms that we use and a lack of clarity on what they mean. And I think that what that's brought out is that law enforcement defines these terms differently than community defines these terms. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity, maybe it's its own recommendation, to come together and try to have that deep discussion to bring that into harmony, because we're hearing all the words, but we're still having undesirable outcomes, right? And so we must be defining them differently. So how can we come together for a common set of terms? And I don't know if that falls under kind of a community outreach piece that we've kind of scratched the surface of in our buckets. But I think that discussion would really go a long way to bringing law enforcement and community together. And it's a point that we keep getting stuck on as a commission, because we can't commonly agree on using the same words, but we're not saying the same thing. And I think that's an area we really ought to pay attention to.
Thank you again for saying that. I'm sorry to add to the bucket, but the term community policing, that's got to be number one, I think, because the definition we were given is not the same definition that many of us are thinking on this call. So community policing.
And it's not the practice either, right? So we need to bring that into harmony.
If you're hitting on all cylinders today, wow.
All right.
It's early in the day, so I'm not so tired, but I was just really reflecting on what the gap. I'm hearing what you're all saying, and I've been hearing it for a while now, and I know what it means to me as a retired law enforcement officer. But I'm hearing that we're not speaking the same language, and even though I kind of consider myself in the middle now, I think that's a piece that we should really focus
on. So Steve or Chaffin, can I just ask a follow-up to Steve's question? It sounds like it could be tied to that third or fourth bullet under 2 that was discussed in our last meeting. How are communities being policed and how do they want to be policed? Could also be a separate category pulled out and developed with ties to number 2. Is that what you're thinking, Steve, and seeing and considering?
It is, and I think they go hand in hand, and even discussions about use of force. Let's define those things, right? And we have an added element right now where, not to take the conversation back to the state level, but just passed a law where Post is required to set up a model set of use of force standards where we could really perhaps contribute to that definition, or at least get one. But yes, so bring is that connection between the community and law enforcement, so we're all on the same page, we all have the same outcomes. I think historically, my experience of being in law enforcement is we're really good at telling you what you need and then doing it and then saying that we accomplished something, right? But without the inclusion of community in that conversation, key stakeholders are missing, and we're not able to actually meet community needs because we didn't really bother to find out what they were in the first place, right? And with that comes challenges of getting access to that information, because it's hard to go to an institution with that much control over you and tell them you're not doing a good job. There are individuals who do that clearly on a regular basis, but collectively it's a little harder to gather that information. So I think that process should also be something we focus on, how to drill down and get it. But in my long-winded way, Josh, the answer to your question is yes. Yes, that's what I was thinking.
I think I would want to piggyback. I think it should be. I'm seeing like maybe it's a kind of a wraparound thing, maybe a separate category, because language kind of permeates everything that we're talking about. Like, and it's such a big, very valid point. And I think it's a way to bridge build with the community. So I think there's a lot of places where there's an intersection with that comment, that idea. So that's great. And I saw Commissioner Johnson take himself off mute, but he's engaged at the moment. Great. I want to. Oh yes, Nate Gross. See your hand.
Yeah, I would just like to add to his great point. I would appreciate, I know other people I've talked to in the community that are aware of this commission would appreciate good definitions from the experts here on the commission on what defining what racial equity is and defining systemic racism, making those definitions part of the discussion too. So everybody looking, from the outside in as well on the commission, they can, have buy-in on what the definitions are and what we're discussing exactly. Because like he said, like Steve said, and what Carol said in the past, words really do matter. And having those definitions would help too.
Yeah, it definitely should be its own bucket then, because so it sounds what you're saying is, maybe one of the first things you guys should do as commission is report out, hey, this is what we mean when we say inclusion and racial equity and all the stuff that's being kicked around, all these words. This is what we're talking about, just so that everyone understands. And I want to, obviously, we're going to put that back to you all to prioritize the conversation. So it certainly sounds like it's becoming its own bucket.
So I want to thank everybody for quickly looking at the document and discussing what may be missing, but looks like, Josh, your document is very comprehensive and inclusive of most of the elements we are discussing here. And I agree with Commissioner Carroll. I think we should now move, Shafon, if you're okay with me, brother, into point one. We still have about 10 minutes or so. And folks, if we focus on point one, and I would love everyone's attention on it, and review it together. Let's have a discussion on that, at least for next 10 minutes, which is develop and fund connections and collaboration.
Can we put it up again? If we could, Josh, that would be great.
Yeah. Collaboration between SLCPD and local mental health and social services organizations. Let's look at that and see what this means to you. We would love to hear from you, because these are words right now, but we want to hear some stories behind it before we go into recommendations. Take a look. Thank you, Josh.
Are you seeing that document?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
And also, when you feel appropriate, Kira provided some background on city's consideration of something similar that may be helpful.
Yeah, I think that if there's information that maybe the commission should have at this point about this point, I think that might be salient to share.
Thank you.
What I can share, and representatives from the police department can speak far more succinctly on what the police department already has. But previously in September, council staff did present to the city council kind of a survey of different programs like Cahoots, Denver Star. They've also heard from Uni at the U. That's a very similar presentation to the one that the commission received. And where the council had landed on next steps after that discussion was, to some extent, they're not wanting to move forward before receiving the commission's recommendations. Another piece is they did include, you've heard about the zero-based budgeting audit. Part of the scope of that audit is consideration of the existing need for mental health crisis response and some best practices on models. So the council's waiting to hear more information on that and hoping to get more data on to what extent the police department's already responding to calls that could be diverted to alternative response programs. That's what I have. I can go in much more depth, but in the interest of time, I'm happy to wait until there's further questions.
Kira, do you have any link or any that you can post to for those of us who would like to read that more?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'll post a link to the staff report, and that has all the attachments that
because it'll give everyone a chance, because we don't have enough time today to delve too deep into it. But thank you for bringing it up. It's very effective. Thank you.
Yeah, Simran, I also emailed it out. Kira sent it over to me prior to the meeting an hour ago, and I shot it out. And
an hour ago? I haven't seen it. Okay, thank you.
I wouldn't expect you to have seen it, or anyone. It was short notice, just referencing it's in the chat and also in the email. So back over to you guys.
And it's about 140-page document.
Well, yeah, the first 4 pages are the summary, and
that is the supporting attachments. Please.
Yeah. I was intimidated too, Steve. Like, I got 30 minutes to read 130 pages.
There is some significant research that I was summarizing that I wanted to have accessible, but I wouldn't expect anybody to read the whole thing.
Yeah, but I think bottom line, Shafin, Simran, I think it aligns with where this subcommittee is going and the thoughts we're developing here.
Excellent. And Kara, and thank you for bringing that up, Kara. And hopefully you'll be available and accessible if there's any other questions that come up about the work that you've done, the research that you pulled together.
I think as we further develop this section, one thing to know is that literature review, a lit review going on simultaneous. That's also looking at Cahoots and STAR and some of those options that perhaps Dr. Prospero is doing that. Perhaps we could bring him into the conversation. And we just made some recommendations for the city to prioritize their CIT detective unit, fully funding and prioritizing that, and having additional detectives that can have field responses, both on day shift and on afternoon shift. That is connected with social workers. So I wonder if we could bring them back to this subcommittee to really drill down more deeply into the work that they're doing, so that we're better informed what the city already has and how we could augment that in this area. Because I think the unarmed, non-certified response model has a lot of value, but let's talk to them and see how we can best merge those two concepts.
And I totally agree. I want to share something, and then I also want to talk about some parameters too. So what I was talking to LAPD, they did research, looked at, Denver's programs, some other programs, and you also want to look at the stats behind the first number, because they're like, oh, we've diverted this many cases, but of those many cases, like 90% called the law enforcement again after they were deployed. So I'm just saying, just make sure that we look at it and you ask the right question. So you're right, maybe having an expert having that conversation would be good. At the same time, I want to say, I think what we need to do is also frame the timeline. I'm still not knowing what the timeline is in terms of, when are people expecting, results from you all, right? So I think we might want to think about that and start working ourselves backwards. So we know how much time we can spend in each bucket, each category. So we know what we can accomplish inside of that time frame. So that might be useful, at least for us. For me, I know it would be helpful to understand, where we're at and what's expected when.
That's a great. Well, sorry, Simran, go ahead.
I will just add to that, not only how much time we have, but how do we use time more effectively? So between this meeting and our next meeting, I would love if we all take on homework, including ourselves, to look at this document more carefully, so that we save our time next meeting going over the document, discussing. But then we can directly go into, do you have a recommendation? Do you accept the way the document is? And if you have a written feedback, please provide it. I know each one of us, this will take some getting out of comfort zone, spending extra 1 or 2 hours, maybe 3 hours on the weekend. But I truly think we all care for the cause here, and this will be well worth it. Josh?
That's a great point, Simran. I appreciate that. That's critical. That's important. And then to Shafan's question about timeline, that is important too, because there are deliverable dates, and I think staff, residents have an expectation. So I was just going to ask David if he could speak to timeline and expectations. But I don't want to put him on the spot. I think we probably want to move on some recommendations, but these are challenging, tough issues, and you want to be efficient. To Steve Andrew-Weirden's point, right? You want recommendations that are feasible, viable, and sustainable. David.
Thanks, Josh. Regarding timeline, you did catch me a little off guard. Sorry. No, it's okay. That's okay. I'm a recovering politician. I can talk my way through anything. I mean, I think in terms of the timeline, thinking about it from a couple perspectives, there's the perspective of the budget, any recommendations that would have the possibility of a budgetary component to it. Not that we're looking at the commission to make budgetary recommendations, but when there's a recommendation that may have a funding need tied to it, that is probably more urgent in terms of a sense of timing. The mayor is currently in the process of putting together her budget proposal to the council, which is sent to the council the beginning of April. And then, Kara, did I get that timing right? Beginning of April, is that correct?
We usually receive the mayor's budget proposal the first week of May.
Oh, thank you. That's what I couldn't remember. I thought I was confusing that first part of May. Thank you. And so the mayor's in the throes of that right now. And so anything that would have a budgetary component, I would say, end of March, first part of April would be greatly appreciated. I do know that the mayor's office is obviously sensitive to the work of the commission and engaging with the commission on where there may be a budgetary impact. Outside of that, Josh, in terms of timing of recommendations, I think along with the recommendations that are coming from training, the training subcommittee, and the recommendations coming from the school safety committee, I think there's a need, obviously, for the policy subcommittee to bring recommendations in a timely way that allow back to the full commission, that allows the full commission to engage in those recommendations, ask questions, have dialogue with the full commission, and make sure that the full commission is in support of those recommendations, and have that process completed, Josh, as a part of the Langdon groups, putting together of that report of recommendations. From the work of the commission has obviously been iterative, and we've been receiving recommendations as they have been coming. But I think in terms of deadlines, and from thinking from that mindset, making sure that the recommendations from the policy subcommittee are prepared for any sort of final report that would come from the commission. Which the timing for that right now is kind of a June 30th is the end deadline in terms of that final report. Is that helpful, Josh? I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know that we anticipated, and again, part of this is iterative, and there's some uncertainty that evolves. But I think the expectation or hope was some recommendations incrementally, quarterly as we go. I think there's some unique circumstances here, and we're developing a framework to start pushing some out. So that big picture timeline overview is helpful, and appreciate that, David.
Josh, can I also just add, somewhat related to that timeline, important to say that when we think about that initial report, that what I said, final report from the Langdon Group and from the commission, I don't mean that to imply that the work of the commission will end June 30th. We've always been anticipating that the work is an ongoing, and the commission being ongoing. So often, so in many ways, the recommendations very much will help build, be recommendations to build off of. And so when I use the term final recommendations, I don't mean in the sense of the end of the work sort of thing. So just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, no, great clarification. Thank you.
Josh,
Yeah, thank you for that.
how are we doing on the time? What do you suggest?
I think Josh, I think we're at time, actually. Is that the case?
Yes, we're at time. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let me just clarify. So I want to thank everybody for their time. I also want to say, first of all, you see that we're getting into like a structure where we're going to have really productive conversations. I think that we do need to kind of revisit the timeline piece. I heard David, thank you for the clarification that this doesn't end, it continues, but the expectation is that there's going to be a set of deliverables from us or from this commission. When I say us, I kind of feel like I'm a part of you guys now, and June 30th. And so that being said, Josh, I think we should work backwards from there and start and kind of come back to this group here and say, hey, so like, if this is the goal, then, let's, check this box off by this month, and this one by this month, and this one. And so we know that and then we can at least have some framework inside the framework where we're moving forward. So Samara, I know that you offered some homework for the people here. If you want to revisit that, just so that that's top of mind as we close.
Absolutely. Well, folks, if you can please look at the document that says PP Subcommittee 17th March 2021 document that Josh shared with us, and look closely into it and give us any feedback in writing. You can copy Josh, he can collect for us, or either way directly to us. We'd love to hear from you, because the more time we spend offline on it, the more efficient we are during the meeting. So we can make progress on making the recommendation, hearing you in the terminology. One task that we haven't covered, one of you recommended, is that there should be a definition of what is racial equity and defining a systematic effort. And we need to come up with a person who is in charge of leading otherwise we're going to lose such important conversations. So we're going to have one. Steve, you unmuted yourself. Would you want to say something?
I do. So in a previous full commission meeting, Dante gave an overview of equity, what equity policing looks like, and kind of a history of systemic racism that I wonder, I'm not trying to volunteer him, and I know he's a paid person, but I wonder if we could go back and revisit that again now that we have law enforcement on the commission with us, either in our subcommittee or in a larger session. And even if we don't fully accept this definition, which I think is a good one, we could at least all be on the same page of what the commission has been exposed to relative to.
Let me make a motion on that, Steve. What if Josh kindly please also share that definition with the group before the next meeting, so everybody had a chance to review the definition, so we don't have to create new one, and see if we have an agreement or disagreement or any changes. I just want to end from Josh, you want to say something?
I was going to say, yeah, you bet. That was shared at the last full commission meeting, and I think we kind of arrived on a consensus.
We just don't want to lose that momentum. We want to just we just want to thank you all for your presence and your openness, your vulnerability. Chief Dowd, thank you for being here and your support. Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Combe, Commissioner Matthews, and Steve, I don't know if you are commissioner, and I want to know how you say your last name. Can you tell me quickly, please, before?
I am a commissioner, and it's pronounced Andrew Weirden.
Andrew Weirden.
Andrew Weirden. Yeah, don't shy away from the weird. Just embrace that, and you'll get it right.
Andrew Weirden. Thank you, Commissioner. Shafan, brother, it's such an honor to work with you. So back to you.
No, I was honored to work with you. I want to say same thing. Thank you for all your time and the work that you're doing with us and away from us. Looking forward to connecting again with you. Okay, thank you, really. Have an amazing day. Josh, do you want to say anything?
I'll just conclude shopping Subcommittee just to set expectations. I believe we had originally this meeting set for the, I want to say the 20th, we were considering the 23rd and 31st, right? And we discussed the possibility of keeping the 31st so it aligns with our next subcommittee meeting, and we can talk offline, but I think that's our intent so we can continue the dialogue and the progress. And in the meantime, engage in the homework as the director of Strauss Institute, Professor Subcommittee, encouraged us, read the documentation. I uploaded the categories into a Google document and shared the link. It's in the folder. And from today's discussion, we can update that and continue offline.
I'll make one more motion on that, Mr. King. That is, if we focus on 1 and 2, so you don't have to focus on all 3 issues. So please focus on 1 and 2. If you have time for 3, perfect. But I think we'll have time to go into 1 and 2 next meeting.
Thank you for that clarification. All right.
Excellent.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. It's nice to meet you too. I look forward to working with you.
Thank
And
you.
here, thank you.
Thank you.